Hi quilters! The subject for today is going to be unfinished objects. If you've been quilting for a while, you may have a few of these lying around. So I'm going to pick one of these off of my design wall over here, and I think it's going to be this star, and I'm going to take it to completion.
I have my star design pulled off the wall and I have it laying on backing and batting, and now I'm on to thread choices. I want my black to go to the black, my white to go to the white, my red to red, and my blue to blue. Now moving on, let's talk about the walking feet that I'm using for just a minute. This has a detachable walking foot, and that means that you can trade out the feet on your feet. And in this case, one of them has a single stitch hole in it, and this is what you would use if you're only going to do a straight stitch.
And it's made just for the needle to pass through that hole. There's no give as far as that goes. The other kind of foot that you might have is one like this that you could do a zigzag stitch on. Now if you'll notice the markings on it, sorry, I'm trying to look through my camera and look at this at the same time. It has like a center marking here and very few markings. And it also, if you look at the way the feet swing out a little bit, there's really not anything to line it up on. This foot, however, has a lot of markings, and it has like this little bitty groove right here that you can follow along. So there's a little groove here, and also there are various markings, and you'll notice that the foot at the edge is stepped. Like there's a 1/4 of an inch step, I'm sorry, an 1/8 of an inch step, a 1/4 of an inch. The 1/8 would actually be back here, and then you come out one more, and that's a 1/4, and you get the idea there. So what this is great for is that little groove you can follow along your seam line. So if you're stitching in the ditch, you can follow that groove, which is a whole lot easier than to try to watch your needle. And so this may be my preference for this. If you use a foot like this, since it has such a small hole for your needle to go through, you want to be very sure that you don't switch it into zigzag for any reason. It's highly unlikely you're going to do it while you're quilting, but you need to know that. Y'all, I can't say this enough. Your camera is your friend. So what I've done is I've just taken this and I've sent a copy of it to my iPad. And what I'm going to do here is think about some quilting ideas. I'm thinking that all the ones that I'm going to do are going to be in coordinating thread, but I'm just going to use a different color so you can see what I'm talking about here. So there are a lot of things that there are plenty of ideas. They're just about endless for quilting ideas. But I think this one lends itself to doing some stitch in the ditch, which I almost never do. So stitch in the ditch is usually when you press fabric, there is you'll press your seams to one side in quilting. There are some people that open them up, but I think they're rare. And so there will be a high side and a low side, and you want your stitches to hit in the low side. For the sake of this, I'm just going to take them right along here and just make some marks. So stitch in the ditch would follow your seam exactly as you can get into the crease of your seam. And you would, of course, if you're doing coordinating colors, you want your colors to be on the side that your color is. So if you've got a red thread, you're going to want to get it in the red and not hit red on your blue. So you could do this and you could go stitch in the ditch, and you could also come maybe a 1/4 of an inch out if you wanted to give a little bit more, I say out from that stitch, this one, and you could give a little bit more emphasis to the shape by bringing it in like this. So that's an idea. Maybe you want to do some sort of flower. So you could come up, you could give yourself a little loop there and do a little flower in the center of your block. And you could do something like that. You could, let me see. You could maybe do some sort of fill like this, where instead of trying to follow your lines, you come around like this. And maybe you emphasize it that way. In blue, you're not gonna see all this white, but it's just gonna give it a little bit of poof right there and poof a good bit in the middle. If you wanted, you could echo that again. So you have some choices there. Maybe you want to do some sort of fill. Like I do this a lot. I do really pretty thick swirly stuff. This is what I call quilting the snot out of something, because you're really giving a lot of and of course your stitches are going to be so much smaller than that. So you start to think, well, there are things that you're going to like, there are things that you're not going to like. Maybe you want to do something that just shoots out like rays. You could do that, which would probably be coming back down like this. Maybe you want to do something with wavy lines. I'm doing these on the ones that show easily. So you could, just go. Just whatever you can think of that you might want to fill it up with.
As you can see from this time lapse, I played with all of the designs quite a bit before I settled on a more simplified design that was my original one. I've already laid down stitches around the inside of the red star, and now I'm coming along and I'm laying another set of stitches along the just inside of the blue part of the section of the star. I've just pivoted and turned the curve here, and notice where the needle sits here, and I'm following this little step on the foot right here, and that is my guide as I go along here, and I will make sure my needle hits right here, and when my needle gets to this point, this is where I turn, and at that point also the needle should be pivoting correctly to give me that's my 1/8 of an inch mark on the inside of my foot. This is how I'm doing each blue segment so that I won't have to break thread multiple times as I'm doing this. So I'll start at the center and I'll come up and go to the right, and then I'll rotate down and go past the center and come up the other side, and then I'll end at the center. There's a little irony here because I'm going to show a time lapse where I've got everything speeded up and tell you to slow down and take your time as you're going around these. This will take a little bit of time to do, and you've got to really have a high tolerance for turning and pivoting a lot in a design like this where you're doing a lot of echo work. As I'm turning the fabric, you may notice that it's really linty, and around the black it really shows. I had lint all over me after doing this from the white batting. That's normal, but it may be the last time that I use a black fabric with a white batting because it was a lot to clean up afterward. The white batting is important because it would have shown through the star tips if I had used a darker batting. After I finished quilting, I took it over to my cutting table and I cleaned up the edges. Now I'll start considering what kind of binding I want to use on the quilt.
I've decided to use this batik as my choice for fabric here. And this this is going to make a lovely binding, and the reds go well together. So I think that this will pull out the red a little bit better. Then I guess I could have used the blue. I didn't. I think the black is pretty unrelieved, so it's not going to be my choice, but I really like this one. I always cut these on the straight of grain, and I fold it over once. You could also fold this back toward yourself, and just make sure that everything is lined up as far as what you got. I'm cutting these at 2.5 inches wide, and I only think that I'm going to use, well, I'm pretty sure I'm only going to use 2 of these. So one there, come up to 2.5. Make sure it lines up on the other side. All right, now I'm on to this. I've got some glue out, and I'm just going to turn this inside like this. This fabric is hard to see, but I'm turning it toward the wrong side here because I'm going to put some glue here. And so I will take a little Elmer's washable school glue and stick this together. A bead of glue there. Add my next piece for my binding. And I'll heat set this into place. And then I'm going to check the length just to make sure. I think this is going to be long enough. It's possible I might need a 3rd piece, but I don't think it, because this is a really small project. I didn't measure it out. Well, I did measure it out before. However, depending on how my corners turn.
As it turned out, I needed 3 pieces of binding for this.
And so what you're going to do next, I glued these together like you saw, and then I took them over and I stitched right here. And now I'm going to go back and I'm going to pop it apart where it was glued and take off about 1/4 inch there. And then I'm going to pop the other end apart right here where it was glued, right back to the stitches where I stitched it together. And then I'm going to come back with my iron. I'm going to fold this in half just like this. And press it in half and do the whole thing. It's time to take the binding that you've made and you're going to attach it to your quilt. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to check your binding all around and make sure that there's no bulk in your binding that ends up at your corners. And the reason that you want to do that is it's just a lot to sew through. So you want to avoid that. So I have gone around and I've clipped this for the sake of this video. Usually I just leave my binding loose, but to make this show a little bit better, I've clipped it. So what you want to do right here is you want to take your binding that you folded, and you want the raw edges here to meet up with the raw edges here. So this is how it's going to be sewn on, is raw edges all along here. So all of your raw edges go together. You want to start sewing. You're going to leave yourself a great big flap here, and you can open your hand as wide as possible, and that is a good area to work in. So you want to leave a big flap there. I have the other piece clipped back just to keep it out of my way from flopping around while I'm talking here or while you're sewing. You want to start sewing here, and you want to do 1/4 inch seam right here. And you're going to do it right till you come to your, right down here. I've made a mark diagonally at 45 degrees. And what you're going to do is, this is the reason you need your binding loose right here, is because you're going to sew at at your 1/4 inch till you get to that mark. You're going to stop with your needle right there and pivot and sew off to the corner of your quilt. This way your binding will fill out that corner perfectly. So then once you've got the binding there, then you will fold it back up, or in most cases you'll just fold it for the first time right there. And what you're going to do is make sure that your binding meets up right here at the edge of your quilt. So your folded over binding should look perfectly flat right there. You have it folded at a 45, and then you have it folded flat. It might need a little bit of help until you turn the corner, and then you're going to come here and you're going to start sewing down this edge right at 1/4 inch all the way till you get to the next corner, and then you're going to do exactly the same process. So I'm ready to begin here. I've switched to a more open toe foot where I can keep an eye on what's going on, and I'm using this white part of the foot here as my guide for the edge of the foot. So I have my edge of my foot and the edge of my quilt lined up. So that's what I'm watching. I'm not watching the needle. Now, as you can see, when I come up to my chalk mark, that is where I'm going to pivot. And I'm going to sew right down where my chalk mark is to the corner of my quilt. I'll clip my threads, and I'll fold this back up to where it'll be flat. I'll make my turn. Now start at the very top at 1/4 inch, just like before. You reposition right here, and you start down the other side. So I've turned my last turn. Move my tripod out a little. And what you can see is I have two flaps here, a left and a right. So my left one, because I'm sewing in this direction, you'll open it up, and you're going to fold it like this on a 45-degree angle in the very same way that you joined your binding. You're now going to join your binding this way. So you're going to put some glue, a bead of glue right here on the top of this, and then you're going to lay your other flap on this direction, and you're going to open it up and heat set it right along that 45-degree place. Once you've heat set this with your iron, what you're going to see, I hope the camera will pick it up, is there's a crease here at a 45-degree angle. So you're going to mark your crease. I have a little chalk pen here. None of this is going to show. It's on the inside of what you're sewing. I should accidentally put another one in there. But you're going to mark your crease there. And the reason that you mark that is just so that it's easier to see when you take it over to your sewing machine. But the other thing that I want to point out is you've got all this here and it's glued together at this point. It's a great place to check it and stretch it and make sure that your binding lines up perfectly here. Before you sew it, make sure that it's lying nice and flat. Now I'm bringing this back over here. I'm stitching up my binding. I'm going to open it up, and where I've heat set it with an iron, I'm now going to pop it open right down to the stitches. And I'll just trim this at about 1/4 of an inch. Wow, I grabbed the dullest scissors that I seem to own. Now you can see when you open this up, it will lay nice and flat. Let's see if I can bring it out here a little bit. Oh, one other thing you will want to, this is actually where my binding originally was joined in a different direction, and it's folded over. So one of the advantages of this, of opening up your binding like this, when you're joining on the diagonal, is that where all these things come together, they'll be much less bulky. I have to use an iron to get this to lay flat, but what you want to do is you want to go back and you want to press it right here. Once you have this pressed, you bring it right back to your machine and you position it right where you had been before, and you just pick up there and you come right on down at 1/4 of an inch, just like you have been. And I go a little bit beyond where I had started, and then I'll come back and clip my threads. Now you can see that you've got a lovely join here. You can see the join is right here. Now I've pressed the edges. I've came around after I've sewn this on, I've pressed the edges back just like this. And what I want to point out is you see the corners here. The way that they were folded before makes them flip over just perfectly in the corners. And then when you flip it over to the other side, all you have to do is fold it like this. So you have it perfect on the front, and then when you flip it over, it'll be perfect on the back too. So what you want to do is you want to do that on every edge. You just go around and you flip those over. Just like that. You're going to come back and you're going to fold them in a minute on the other side. But you flip them over and you can start to see it's looking like this on the front. And then what you want to do, once you've got these flipped over, is you want to come back with either some pins or some clips, or you can press this and glue it. I find that the easy way right now for me to do this is just to open up some clips, start at a corner, and just make sure everything is laid nicely and evenly. So what you want with your quilt is for your quilt sandwich to fully fill your binding, and then you want a nice even binding as you come along. So you just want to clip this, make sure that everything is completely filled up as far as your quilt going into your binding, and you want to just get you a few clips to assist you in holding it in place. And I do find this is where I really like the clips, is in the corners, because once you have it folded in a place, it makes it so easy to just come to these corners on this side, and you've already got them perfect. I say perfect, but this one's not folding perfect for me. It's my fingers. It's not that there's anything wrong with the method here. So I'm just trying to get it to where it joins up exactly on the corner there. and then you clip that into place, and it's just waiting for you as you sew. It makes it very quick, and I'm all about quick. So you're just coming around and you're doing your entire side as far as the clips go, and you're just setting yourself up for a quick sew in a few minutes. And you can come back and clip the threads, or you can tuck them under. It doesn't matter. Just your preference on that. Oh, you notice that I got a few pieces that turned under on my quilt, but that's okay. It just pulled out because it was just a couple of threads that had folded over. Might need a couple more just to make this side behave like it's supposed to. And of course, you can do a little manipulation as you go around this to make it set. I find that it's easier as I'm coming down to fold up from the bottom, for me at least, and then take my side fold over, which is another reason it's easier if you're clipping these in advance, because the tendency if you're coming down this way is just to get here and then you fold your bottom one up. But I think it's a little bit easier to go in the other direction, at least for a right-handed person. The top is complete. It is turned out, the whole piece is a 21-inch square. It's just perfect in both directions. So I was pleased with that. And what I ended up doing, I had stitched my binding down on the back, and I'd done it in white, but I forgot to switch to a black bobbin thread, and it showed very much on the other side. So I have got up this morning, had a cup of coffee, and seam ripped this out. Didn't take any longer than it took me to drink my coffee. And then I came back and I restitched this using a red thread on this side and a black bobbin thread, and I like the results a lot better. I was thinking about a couple of things. This is going to go on my dining room table, and I like something like this because you can set a vase on top of it, and it looks good from every direction at the center. So no matter where you're looking at it, whatever kind of flowers you have in here, it has a nice bottom for this. And I could even do like a Christmas vase, and because I have one out year round, I set this one here, and it looks just as good. So either way, I like the results. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more compulsive quilting and embroidery videos.